Hello everyone, myself Sukrishna. In this video, I am going to explain about what are all the statuses are available for queue items in UiPath Orchestrator queues, add queue item activity, add transaction item activities in UiPath Studio. So let's get started. For queue items, we have 7 statuses are available. When you add queue items in UiPath Orchestrator queues, the initial status would be new. When you start processing the queue item, the status will change from new to in progress. While processing the queue item, in case of any business exception or system exception, the status will change it to failed. In the system exception, we have two scenarios. While creating the queue, if you are not enable the failed item option, as soon as we get the system exception, immediately the status will change it to failed. In case if you are enable the failed item option at the time of creating the queue, the queue item will retry as per the max number of times that we mentioned, and at the end still if the queue item failed, the status will change it to failed after retrying the max number of times. In case if the queue item processed successfully, the status will change it to successful. While processing the queue item, in case of any system exception, and if you are not set the failed status properly, the in progress item status will change it to abandoned state after 24 hours. In case of any system exception, and if you enable the failed item at the time of creating the queue, so the queue item will retry as per the max number of time that we mentioned. So the same queue item will retry multiple times, right? So whatever the queue items are retried and not success, so those queue items status would be retried. In case if we delete the queue items, the status would be deleted. Add queue item activity is used to add the queue items in the UiPath Orchestrator queue. When you add queue items using the add queue item activity, the status of the queue items would be new. For this activity, we need to select the queue name. If the mentioned queue name is available in the folder that Studio is connected, the orchestrator folder path is not required to mention. If the mentioned queue name is not available in the folder that Studio is connected, then we need to specify the orchestrator folder path. So let's verify the queue name that I have selected. So this is the queue name that I have selected. So if I go to the view transaction, so here no transactions, right? In the item information, we need to specify the specific data. So here we need to mention the specific data in the key and value format. So here I am going to mention the key as PO number, and I'm going to mention the value as PO 1234, and I'm going to mention another key, invoice number. Okay, click on save. If you want, we can mention the deadline, postpone date, and we can select the priority. So here we have three options are available: low, normal, and high. Then we have a reference option is available. So here I am mentioning the reference as 1234. Right? Now let's save and run the process and verify the output. Now the process execution has been completed. So let's go to the UiPath Orchestrator and let's verify the queue is added or not. So let's refresh. So the new queue item has been added. So the reference number 1234 priority high, and here the PO number and invoice number, right? For the demonstration purpose, I have created one Excel, Acme work items. Here I have mentioned few columns: work ID, description, type, status and date. So let's see how we can add these details one by one in the UiPath Orchestrator queue. So the first thing, we need to read the Excel file. So for that I am going to take an activity, read range workbook activity. So here we need to mention the Excel file path, and then we need to specify the sheet name. So the output would be data table dt. Then we need to iterate the data table. For that I am going to take an activity, for each row in data table. So here in the data table section we need to mention the data table variable, and I'm going to move this add queue item activity in the body section. So here in the item information we need to modify the key and value details. In the key section I am going to mention the column names, and in the value section I am going to mention the actual values. So let me copy the column name. So here in the current row we have a data. So now I have added all the key and value details. So click on save. Then if you want we can mention the deadline. So here I am going to mention the deadline. So I am going to click on the open in expression editor. So here I am going to mention the deadline as datetime dot now dot add days 1, right? And in the postpone I am going to mention the same kind of expression, datetime dot now dot add hours 2. Means after adding the queue items in the UiPath Orchestrator queue, after 2 hours only the data will be picked up for processing. The priority would be high. So here I am going to change the reference. So my reference format would be work ID and status. So here I am going to mention current row, work ID dot toString. to string, right? Run the process and verify the output. Now the process execution has been completed. So let's go to the UiPath Orchestrator. So let's refresh. So here we can see all the queue items has been added. So here we can find the deadline and postpone time, right? The reference is for KD, hyphen and the status. And if you go to the details, so work ID, description, type, status and date, all the details has been added, right? Here I have created another queue, test underscore unique reference. So for this queue, I have enabled the unique reference. So let's see if you try to add the duplicate reference for this queue, what will happen in the UiPath Studio. In the Acme work items Excel file, I am going to mention the duplicate work ID, right? Let's save. So here we need to change the queue name. So I am changing the queue name to test underscore unique reference. Now let's save and run the process and let's see what will happen. So we are getting the exception, right? And if I open the exception message, it is saying that duplicate reference, right? So let's go to the UiPath Orchestrator. So let's refresh. The first row details has been added successfully, but when you add the second row details with the same reference, we are getting the exception because we are enable the unique reference option, right? So as we enable the unique reference, so it will not going to allow the duplicate reference, right? So let's click on ignore and let's continue. So let's refresh. So except the second row, all the details has been added, right? Add transaction item is used to add the transaction details in the UiPath Orchestrator queues. As soon as we add the transaction item details, immediately we should process and the status of the add transaction item is in progress. For this activity, we need to select the queue name. So here I am selecting the queue name as test underscore unique reference. Then here we have an option to mention the reference. In the reference section, I am going to mention work ID. So work ID is available in the current row dot string, right? So the same thing, I am going to mention the specific data in the transaction information, right? Click on save. The output of the add transaction item will give us the transaction item, right? So here we can create a variable. For this transaction item, we will have all the transaction related information like specific data, reference number and all. Now let's save and run the process and verify the output. And before that, let me remove the duplicate reference in the input file. Now let's save and run the process. Now the process execution has been completed. So let's go to the UiPath Orchestrator. So click on three dots, click on view transactions. The transaction details has been added and here we can see work ID as a reference and the status is in progress. And if you go to the details, we have only work ID, right? So when you add the details using the add transaction item, so the default status is in progress and we should process them immediately. So as per the process, we need to set the status either failure or success.